Sandra Kowalczyk arrived at Walter Reed at 5:50 in the morning, the same as she had for 19 years. She parked in the same spot. She walked the same path from the parking garage to the staff entrance. She stopped at the same vending machine, not to buy anything, just to check if the broken light on C7 had been fixed yet. It had not. She made a mental note she would never report to anyone. Her locker was number 44. Inside it, one spare pair of compression socks, a tube of hand cream that had been 3/4 empty for 6 months, and a laminated photograph tucked behind her staff ID. The photograph showed a man with a wide smile standing in front of a lake. She did not display it. She just kept it close, the way you keep something that does not need explaining to anyone else. She poured burned coffee into her thermos, clipped her badge to her coat, and walked to the trauma floor. She was 61 years old. Her hair had gone silver sometime around 50, and she had not done anything about it. She wore sensible shoes and spoke in a calm, even voice that did not rise when things went wrong. In 19 years, no one at the hospital had seen her raise her voice. In 19 years, she had never been late. The younger nurses on the floor called her the ghost. Not to be mean, she simply appeared when something needed doing and disappeared when it did not. She had a way of adjusting a patient's IV before anyone else noticed it needed adjusting, and then walking quietly to the next room before the patient could say thank you. She attended every shift meeting, said exactly what was necessary, and did not stay for the small talk. She did not talk about the 1980s. She did not talk about El Salvador. She did not talk about the decoration from the Department of Defense sitting in a shoebox on the top shelf of her hall closet at home. She just worked. The colonel arrived on a Wednesday for a routine procedure. He was a broad-shouldered man with the kind of posture that enters a room before the rest of him does. He had 3 staff members with him, even for something this straightforward, because that was how some people moved through the world. His chart needed pulling. The attending physician called for the charge nurse. Sandra appeared. The colonel looked at her. He took in the silver hair, the compression socks, the slight indent in her coat pocket where her thermos had been sitting for years. He looked at her the way people sometimes look at something when it does not match what they expected to find. "You're in charge?" he said. It was not a cruel question. That almost made it harder to hear. One of the younger residents standing nearby let out a small sound, a half-laugh, the kind you try to catch before it leaves your mouth and don't quite manage. Sandra turned and looked at him. Her expression did not change. Then she turned back to the colonel, opened the chart, and briefed him in clean and precise clinical language. She covered his history, his current readings, the procedure details, the recovery expectations. She did it in 2 minutes flat. Everything the attending physician would have said better, in half the time. She handed the chart to the attending. Bay 4, she said to no one in particular, because Bay 4 had been quietly developing a problem for the last 8 minutes that no one else had noticed yet. She walked away. The colonel watched her go. He stood there with his chart in his hands, and something in his face shifted just slightly, the way a room shifts when a window opens. 31 days later, at 3 o'clock in the morning, a patient came in through the emergency entrance. His name was Darius Webb, Chief Warrant Officer, Special Forces, 4 combat deployments, a traumatic brain injury from an IED 3 years prior that had never fully resolved, soft tissue damage to both hands. He had not slept in 4 days, and the 4 days before that had not been much better. At his previous facility, things had not gone well. There had been a glass partition that no longer existed. 3 orderlies had tried to intervene. A supervisor had called for a sedative protocol, which had made everything worse, because Darius Webb was a man who had spent 18 years in situations where someone trying to slow him down usually meant something had gone very wrong. He arrived at Walter Reed restrained and furious and deeply exhausted in the way that goes past the body and into something harder to name. The night supervisor reviewed the file. She called for the sedative tray. She assigned 2 senior orderlies. Sandra was passing the nurse's station when she heard the report. She picked up the tray and set it on the cart outside the door. "I'll go in," she said. "Sandra," the supervisor gave her a careful look. "His file says." "I read the file." She walked into the room and closed the door behind her. What happened in that room in the next 45 minutes, No one outside of it ever fully learned. The sedative tray sat untouched on the cart in the hallway. The two orderlies stood next to it, exchanging glances at the 10-minute mark. At 20 minutes, the night supervisor came and stood with them. At 30 minutes, someone went to get the attending on call. At 45 minutes, the room was quiet. A few minutes after that, Sandra opened the door and stepped out. "He's asleep," she said. "Natural. He needs about 10 hours. Do not wake him for vitals until at least 9. She looked at the sedative tray. "That can go back." She walked back to the nurse's station and picked up the next chart. In Darius Webb's file, under the section marked Patient Response, she had written 3 words: responded to conversation. He asked about her in the morning, not insistently. He was not a man who pried, but he asked. The way you ask about someone when they have done something for you that you cannot quite account for. The day nurse gave him the standard answer: 19 years on the floor, very experienced, great with difficult cases. That was not what he was asking. There was a young nurse on the evening shift, a 24-year-old from Cincinnati named Marcus, who had 2 speeds, enthusiastic and asleep. He had a habit that the older staff found both charming and slightly concerning. He Googled everyone. Patients, doctors, pharmaceutical reps who came through. He said it helped him understand context. What it mostly did was give him a lot of trivia and, occasionally, something that actually mattered. He Googled Sandra Kowalczyk the night after Darius Webb asked. He found almost nothing, which Marcus had learned was sometimes its own kind of finding. He searched for 2 more hours, going sideways through declassified military records, a database that covered civilian attachments to Special Forces units in Central America, and an archived government report from 1989 that had most of its details redacted, but not all of them. He found a footnote. Her name, her maiden name, Marchetti, in a list of civilian medical personnel attached to a Special Forces advisory unit operating in El Salvador and Honduras between 1983 and 1986. 12 months embedded in active operational territory. The unit had been small. The work had been classified. The conditions had been, according to the unredacted portions of the report, extreme. At the bottom of the footnote, a reference number. Marcus traced it to a DoD decoration record. Civilian medal, issued under a program that had since been quietly dissolved. Her name, her decoration, and a note that said, in the bland official language of forms, recipient requested non-public recognition. She had asked them not to announce it. She had asked them not to tell anyone. Marcus sat with this for a long time. Then he printed the page, walked quietly to Darius Webb's room, and slid it under the door. Darius Webb made one phone call the next morning. The call went to a man he had served with, who called 2 others, who each called more. The network moved the way those networks move, without announcement, without noise, with a kind of quiet efficiency that is its own form of communication. Within 48 hours, there were 14 men confirmed, Green Berets, ages ranging from 31 to 63. Some still active, some retired. They came from Texas and North Carolina and Georgia, and one from as far as Washington State. Some arranged leave, some took vacation days. One drove through the night. They did not tell the hospital administration what they were planning. They did not file a request. They showed up on a Tuesday morning in March before the 6 o'clock shift change, filtered in through the main entrance in 1s and 2s, and arranged themselves in the corridor outside the trauma floor. Some were in uniform. Some were in civilian clothes with the posture of people who have never fully stopped being in uniform. They stood straight, and they stood quiet, and they waited. Sandra parked in her usual spot at 550. She walked the same path. She checked the light on C7, which had still not been fixed. She made the mental note. She pushed through the staff door and started down the corridor toward the trauma floor. She stopped. There were 14 men standing in her hallway. She recognized Darius Webb immediately. He was standing at the front, his posture formal, his expression serious in the way that some faces go when they are holding something important. He was in uniform. All of them were in uniform, or close to it. Even the ones in civilian clothes had straightened into something that looked like ceremony. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Darius Webb took one step forward and said, very clearly, "Ma'am, He raised his hand in a salute. The full salute, arm at the precise angle, held, not the brief acknowledgement you give in passing, the kind you sustain. Behind him, all 13 others came up at the same moment. 14 men, 14 salutes. Held in the corridor of a hospital at 6 in the morning for a 61-year-old woman in compression socks holding a stainless steel thermos. Sandra stood very still. She had made certain decisions, a long time ago, about how she would behave in moments that tried to take her off balance. In rooms without electricity, with supplies she had improvised from whatever was available, while sounds came from outside that she did not let herself think too hard about, she had learned to hold herself in a still place inside. It had kept her useful. It had kept her whole. She stood in that place now. She looked at Darius Webb. Then she looked at the line of men behind him. She set her thermos down carefully on the nearest surface. She brought her hand up and returned the salute. Straight and clean and held, the way she had learned to do it a long time ago, in a context no one here had known about until recently. She held it for the full count. Then she picked up her thermos and looked at the 14 of them standing in her corridor. "You're blocking the hall," she said. And she walked through them, gentle as water around stones, and went to start her shift. The hospital administration found out by noon. By the afternoon, a senior administrator had called Sandra into a small meeting room and explained that they would very much like to honor her properly, with a ceremony and an announcement and a formal recognition in front of the full staff. She listened to all of it. She was polite. She let him finish. Then she said, "I appreciate that. I'd rather not." The administrator blinked. "Sandra, these are things people should know about you. The people who need to know, she said, and she went back to the floor. Darius Webb sent her a gift before he was discharged. A thermos, not a suggestion that her current one was inadequate, but the kind of gift that means something. Stainless steel, double-walled, the kind that keeps coffee warm for 6 hours, which on a 12-hour shift is not enough, but is better than nothing. On the side, in small engraved letters, for the ghost who showed up. She used it every shift after that. The staff noticed the new thermos. Nobody asked where it came from. It had the quality of a thing that did not need explaining. She worked the trauma floor for 4 more years. She was never late. The light on C7 was finally fixed in her last year. She found out through the vending machine on a Thursday morning in October, and stood there for a moment, as if she was not sure what to do with this information. Then she walked to her shift. At her retirement, the hospital put together a small gathering in the staff break room. There was a sheet cake. Someone had made a slideshow with 19 years of photographs, most of which Sandra appeared in at the edge of, slightly blurred, clearly mid-task. Someone asked her, eventually. It was Marcus, now 28 and no longer quite as enthusiastic, but still with the habit of asking the things others thought but didn't say. Why she had never mentioned El Salvador. Why she had never said anything, in 19 years, about any of it. Sandra considered this. She held her new thermos, the engraved one, in both hands, and looked at the question with the same calm she applied to everything. "Nobody asked," she said. Marcus opened his mouth. She smiled, just slightly. "That's not a complaint, Marcus. That's just how it was. The work was what mattered." She finished her coffee. Then she said, "There's a patient in Bay 4 you should check on. His blood pressure has been inconsistent all morning, and the afternoon team won't catch it until it's already a problem." Marcus stared at her. "You're not on the schedule today. You're at your own retirement party." "I know," she said. She set down the thermos and walked out of the break room. She was in Bay 4 for 12 minutes. The patient's blood pressure was stabilized before the afternoon team arrived. In the chart, under notes, someone had written, in handwriting that was very familiar to anyone who had worked the floor for more than a week, "Adjusted. Monitor at 2-hour intervals." She was gone before anyone could say goodbye properly. The resident who had laughed in the hallway that day, the half-laugh he had tried to swallow and hadn't quite, had become, by most accounts, a good physician, careful, attentive. He had a note he had written to himself the morning after the 14 men stood in the corridor, folded into his wallet, soft at the creases now from years of being there. It said, "Find out who is in the room." He had never thrown it away. He didn't think he would.